Hello, everyone, and welcome. Just so you know, we'll start shortly, maybe a minute or two after the hour, just so we can allow some more folks to come in. Thanks. Okay, we'll get started. Please be aware that this event is being recorded and will be made available on the People Make History webpage in the future, and the recording has started. So welcome everybody to the People Make History lecture series, Fugitive Verses with Dr. Afua Cooper. My name is Lauren Burrows, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Education and Inclusion Coordinator at Wilfrid Laurier University, Center for Student Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion on the Brantford campus. I will be moderating today. I'm excited for us to come together with our esteemed guest, Dr. Cooper, as part of Laurier's incredible Black History Month schedule. I'd like to start by recognizing that Wilfrid Laurier University and its campuses are located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Attawandaron peoples. This land is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and Haldeman Treaty that describe the land we are occupying 6 miles deep from each side of the Grand River as Six Nations territory. As we celebrate Black History Month, or African Heritage Month, as it's known in some parts of Canada, I call upon the words of URAIS, a powerful group of student organizers who, in a long legacy of anti-racist organizing, remind us that Black liberation is essential to all equity work, and that the values and principles behind Black liberation are inextricably linked to Indigenous sovereignty. So as we move through today's event and the remainder of Black History Month, I encourage us to ground our learning in solidarity with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, engage in justice seeking as a year-round enduring priority, and consider how the histories of this land have spanned thousands of years before the creation of the Canadian nation state, and our collective well-being requires us to think far into the future. As Afua Cooper says, with strength and resilience and compassion and empathy, we need that now more than ever. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Tara Brookfield. Tara is the an associate professor of history and youth and children's studies, and she'll be sharing more about the lecture series.
Great, thank you, Lauren. Today's event is not only part of Laurier's Black History Month celebrations, but it's part of the history program in Brantford's People Make History biannual storytelling series, which is supported by the estate of Mary J. Stedman. Each term, the history program at Brantford invites witnesses and participants of a historic event or movement to tell their stories. By sharing their memories and knowledge, they bring history alive and make critical links between the past and contemporary times. In the past, we've hosted activists, artists, diplomats, veterans, and survivors of wars and genocide. Today, our People Make History speaker is Dr. Afua Cooper. She's an educator, a performance artist, and a historian who will share her observations on everyday Black life and Black history in verse. So a poet is a first for us in the storytelling series. So on behalf of the history faculty and students, I wanted to share my appreciation for Dr. Cooper in visiting Laurier today to share her knowledge and creativity with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I read a little bit more about our guest today, I will do a few housekeeping items. So please remember that today's reading will be followed by a Q&A period. So feel free to share your questions into the Q&A function throughout the talk. Also note that this is a zero tolerance space for hate or hateful speech. And those who are considered to be engaging in those ways will be asked to leave. So thank you so much for your consideration. And now the reason we're all here, we're incredibly excited to welcome Dr. Afua Cooper. Dr. Cooper is cross-appointed to departments of history and sociology and social anthropology, the Faculty of Graduate Studies, Gender, Women, and Women's Studies at Dalhousie University in Halifax. She's a Portia White Prize winner, Poet Laureate Emerita at Halifax Regional Municipality, the coordinator of the Black and African Diaspora Studies minor at Dalhousie, the founder and immediate past president of the Black Canadian Studies Association, the chair of the Lord Dalhousie Scholarly Panel on Slavery and Race, lead author on the report on Lord Dalhousie's History of Slavery and Race, founder of the Dalhousie Black Faculty and Staff Caucus, honoree of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission Award for Contributions to Education, and board member of the Women's Health Organization International and the Jamaican Cultural Association of Nova Scotia. She is celebrated for her work, including The Hanging of Angelique, The Untold Story of Slavery in Canada, and The Burning of Old Montreal, La Pendaison d'Angelique. And my name is Phyllis Wheatley, A Story of Slavery and Freedom. Welcome. We are so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for such a wonderful introduction. And thanks to you also for helping to set up this Black History Month celebration. I want to thank also Tara Brooks for communicating with me from several weeks ago and inviting me to present at the Laurier Black History Month People Make History event. So, and I also want to say Happy Black History Month to everyone. One of the ways I do history, of course, many people know, is through scholarship, is through research. Another way is through storytelling. And for me, the storytelling is poetry. And I've been doing this ever since I was a child. Poetry began speaking to me as a vehicle of my own creative expression from the time I was about 10 years old, growing up in Jamaica. And, you know, poetry has seized me. I've always been interested in looking at the past through verse and the present. I grew up in Jamaica, born and raised in Jamaica, an incredible society in terms of the oral tradition, in terms of culture, and in terms of having teachers who helped us to foster that creativity. And so I'm going to begin with two short verses from two Jamaican women poets. The first one is Jean da Costa. And the verse is, how you call to me, voices in sleep, echoes of storms stilled dusk dawns ago, before my own instant furled out of the turning world. And the next verse is by Olive Senior, another poet. My ancestors are nearer than albums of pictures. I tread on heels thrust into broken down slippers. And those two verses really, I think, encapsulate for me just, you know, my personal exploration into poetry, how family is so important, how history, how my genealogy, how the stories that my parents and grandparents and neighbors told me when I was a child, how those stories still stay with me and guide me through the world, and how they still nourish me. So, you know, as a Black person, I don't have to say that within the Americas, people of the African diaspora or scatterings to these parts came about as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. And in so many of these societies, you had enslaved people who ran away, who became fugitives. And sometimes when I look at slave advertisements, I think of these people as fugitives. They're running away and their masters are advertising for them or advertising notice of their flight from bondage, whether they were children, whether they were men, whether they were women. And I think of these little snippets of advertisements in various colonial newspapers as verses, as poetry, written by the slave masters, yes, but telling the stories of these fugitives from slavery. In Ontario, especially, many of us know about, I think if there's one story we know about Black history is that of the Underground Railroad. And it's celebrated in Ontario's history. You know, the land on which Laurier sits right now, Kitchener, Waterloo region, southwestern Ontario. It's also a celebrated area for Underground Railroad history. And you know, while we are saying, I've said it, many other scholars and commentators have said it, that Canada has latched on to the Underground Railroad era, you know, when it positions itself as morally superior to the United States, because the runaways who were coming into Ontario were fugitives from slavery, from American slavery. And they came into southwestern Ontario and built communities and established communities, some of which are still around today, and the families are still around today. But it, you know, just latching onto that story absolves Canada of its own story of slaveholding before the Underground Railroad era, its own story of the internal slaveholding that was part of this country. And I know I'm using the term Canada loosely, but a part of this country from, let's say, 1628 to 1834, when the British abolished slavery. Nonetheless, we still honor the Underground Railroad immigrants. We still honor their stories because they are stories of resilience, they're stories of pain. And I think of those who didn't make it, those who crossed the Detroit River and the Niagara River and elsewhere and made it and set up communities in Windsor and Chatham and London and Kitchener and Waterloo, but thousands more didn't make it. So I honor their story, and I honor their descendants who are still with us today. And here's one story, and I call this poem Harriet Shepherd, and it's from my book, Memories Have Tongue. And Harriet Shepherd fled from Maryland with her children. And these stories I got from William Still's book. William Still was a station master, meaning someone who aided fugitives from slavery in Philadelphia. And he kept notes of these people, and he writes these small biographies of them. And so anyone who passes through Philadelphia, he interviews them, and then he sends them on further north until they reach the Ontario Territory. Harriet Shepherd, mother of 5 small children, Anna Maria, Edwin, Eliza Jane, Marianne, and John Henry, had had enough of slavery. So she seized her master's carriages and horses, and along with 5 other slaves rode to freedom, Maryland, Delaware, Philadelphia, Canada. So escaping with 5 small children was no small feat. And Anne Maria Jackson, another woman, escaped with 7 children. And I'm actually writing an essay now on Anne Maria Jackson and her flight and her settlement in Toronto for a collection that's coming out shortly by McGill Queen's University Press. So this poem, this meditation is called 7 Children. Anne Maria Jackson lost her husband in the poorhouse. He died a madman because 2 of his children were sold by massa. And even though in the eyes of Delaware law, he was a free man, he still had no rights over his children. because slave children inherited the status of their mothers, and Anne Maria Jackson was a slave. So when her husband died, Anna Maria knew that more of her children would be sold. Anne Maria knew that she had to be bold. So she took her 7 remaining children and left Massa, left the plantation, left the pain, left the grief behind. In the month of November 1858, she arrived with her 7 children in St. Catharines, Canada, free. So the last 2, or the first 2, were of women and their children. And we also have to honor children. And here's a girl, Maria Weems, who fled on her own. Of course, she was assisted. And the poem is called Fleeing Girl of 15 in Male Attire. Maria Weems, aged 15, became a boy, took the name of Joe Wright, and through the help of friends, escaped to Canada, to Buxton. And just to continue with more fugitive verses, I'm gonna read 2 poems about Marie-Joseph Angelique. The book I wrote, The Hanging of Angelique, was mentioned by Lauren. And I've written about Angelique in scholarly publications, in poetry, for websites. So this is I would say it's a project that I'm always involved with, because as I continue doing the research, more information gets to be discovered. So I'll read 2 pieces. The first one is called Marie-Joseph Angelique, and it's from my book, Memories Have Tongue. And it's a children's poem. I wrote it for children. Marie-Joseph Angelique hated the chains of slavery. She felt the strong should not oppress the weak, that all people should be free, 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 free. She lived a slave in Montreal town, but in her heart she was free. So the city she did burn down, running, 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 running for her liberty. But Marie was caught, and she was tried, and she was hanged in the square of Montreal. Marie-Joseph Angelique did not want to be a slave. She preferred death to slavery. She preferred death to slavery. She preferred death to slavery. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my God and be free, 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 free. The next poem 2 about Angelique is called Confessions of a Woman Who Burnt Down a Town. And I said it's inspired by the story of Marie-Joseph Angelique, and it's from another book of poetry called Copper Woman and Other Poems. As well, Angelique, she was accused of burning down Montreal in 1734, and she was arrested, tried, found guilty, and executed. The fire happened in April 1734, and she was executed in June 1734. So she endured a 2-month trial at both the lower court in Montreal and then the higher court in what is now Quebec City. And she did have children. So I put all of those threads as much as I could in the story. So here's her voice. I buried the twins that evening. They died of smallpox, were only 8 months old. Madame came to the funeral and said to me by way of consolation, "C'est la vie. I too have lost my own." I went back to work in Madame's house that same evening, and at supper, she yelled at me and boxed me full in the face, blam! Because I overturned the gravy bowl in her lap. I remember my journey from my island to this island. Monsieur came from Montreal on one of his business trips. He bought me because he said I looked like a healthy wench. He died soon after, and Madame never forgave me, but I had nothing to do with it. He died from consumption. The twins died too. And after we buried them that evening, my heart changed position in my chest, and I was seized with one desire, and one desire only, and that was to leave the prison of this island. But where could I go? Because throughout the whole world, in all the continents, people who looked like me were bound, but still all I could see was my feet, them running, no chains, no ropes, no shackles, running free, free, free. Madame now talking to her best friend and confessor, Father Labadie, and she said, "I'm going to sell that negress. She getting too much for me. She getting too uppity. And furthermore, since my husband died, I just can't seem to manage. Look a buyer for my father. Perhaps the church is interested." I bring in the food and pretend like I never hear. I serve the food good and proper, was on my best behavior. Roll back my lip and skin my teeth, roll back my eye and show the white. Then I went back to my room and I make my plan, you see? Smoke, too much smoke. I only intend for one house to burn. Fire, too much fire. But it done gone so already, and I running my feet unshackled and bound free, running past the city limits while behind me, the fire rage and my raging heart change back into its rightful position. He was running to Claude Thibault from France. Claude Thibault, old soldier, salt stealer. I gave him all my food to take me and show me the way to New England, but he took the food while I was sleeping, and the constables, them catch me. I don't utter a word as I sit in the jailhouse. And Father Labadie, he come now, he come to confess me. He said I should confess, but I refuse. Dear God is not my God. Father Labadie said, Marie-Joseph Angelique, arson is one of the worst crimes in New France. Confess now and save your soul. Outside the mob, waiting to rip me from limb to limb, but I'm not afraid. A strange calm fill my body and I'm at peace, peace. Guilty, the judge pronounced, and the sentence, them said them I go cut off my hand, them I go burn my body alive. Oh my God, and then scatter the ashes to the four corners of the earth. I broke down then, my body crumpled in a heap, and before my eyes I see the twins and they look so alive, like they're waiting for me to come and nurse them. And then them take me to the high court and them reduce the sentence. Now them said them only going hang me and then burn my body. And Father Labadie come back for him confession, and I confess. Is I Marie who set the fire? I said yes. I started in Madame's house down by the river. 50 buildings destroyed, the hospital, the cathedral. I said yes. Is I Marie who burned this city? So write that down, Father Labadie. write down my story. So then we know it, then we know it, then we know it in a them Black history. With my heart burning, I take the sacrament. I accept the final rites. Outside, the guard is waiting to take me to my hanging. Outside, the guard is waiting to take me to my dying. Outside, the guard is waiting to take me to my burning, and soon I will be free from the prison of this island, and I will fly, 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 little bird. Petit oiseau, fly. I'll read from the same book. And the same book is Copper Woman and Other Poems. And I'll read about Richard Pierpoint. I included him at the last minute because I said, oh, Richard Pierpoint spent his last days in Fergus, Ontario, which is around, in the general vicinity of where Laurier is. So I think of his spirit still in that area. Richard Pierpoint was an African man who survived the Middle Passage and came into Connecticut, sold as a slave. And when the 13 colonies revolted against Mother Country Britain, the British officials in 13 colonies, Virginia in particular, called on enslaved Africans to run away from their rebel masters and join the British standard. And Richard Pierpoint was one of those as a young man. And when the war ended, he came over into Canada, Niagara, St. Catharines. Then he ended up in Fergus. And in 1821, there was this letter that he wrote to the governor of Upper Canada. And he had been in North America for 60 years at the time. And in the petition, he says to the governor, I want to go back home. I want to go home to Africa. I miss my family. And I think after being in North America for 60 years, he still felt like he didn't belong. There was this grief in his heart, this loss. He experienced this feeling of loss. And one of the things he did in the petition is also to tell his story. Who am I? What am I doing here? How did I get here? So it's for me, it was like a found poem. So I use actually, and I paraphrased it a bit, the one main paragraph in the petition in the poem, and then I wove the poem around it. And because he fought for the British during the American Revolutionary War, I named the poem or subtitled the poem, Revolutionary Soldier. And I'm also riffing on Bob Marley's Buffalo Soldier. Revolutionary soldier, revolutionary soldier, revolutionary soldier, revolution. Richard Pierpoint, a revolutionary soldier at age 77, is no longer in his vigor. Now his only wish is for the government to send him back to his native settlement. So he writes to the king's governor this July 1821 letter. Your petitioner, Richard Pierpoint, now of the town of Niagara, a man of color, a native of Africa, and an inhabitant of Upper Canada since 1780, most humbly sheweth That your excellency's petitioner is a native of Bondu in Futa, that at the age 16 I was made prisoner, sold as a slave, conveyed to America, bought by a British officer, served the king during the War of Revolution in a corps called Butler's Rangers, and again during the War of Napoleon in a corps of color, raised right here on the frontier of Niagara. Revolutionary soldier, said he was stolen from Africa and he was brought to America. In exchange for my freedom, I fought your revolution and raised you new nations on both sides of the division. That your excellency's petitioner is now old and without property, that he has much difficulty to obtain a livelihood by his labor, and that he wants desperately to return to the land of his mother. That if his majesty's government be so graciously pleased to grant him some relief, you damn thief, he wished, it may be, by affording him the means to proceed to England and from thence to a settlement near the Gambia or Senegal region, from whence he could return to Futa, because you stole my life. You took me from my wife. You caused my family strife. You stuck in my heart a knife. You cast my people into slavery. You stole the wealth of my country. Now give me my reparations for my long overdue repatriation. I wish again to see the Senegal waters flow. I wish again to see the spotted buffalo. Gaze at the face of the children and hold the hands of my brother men. My heart is breaking inside my chest, a prickly pain all through my flesh, a strangulation around my neck where the slave hunters tied the rope. I still hear the screams of my wife as the white men snuffed out her life, and me, them tied me up with a rope and a chain and took me to this valley of pain. Why? But I survived. I survived the Middle Passage. I survived the years of enslavement. Then I escaped, became a loyalist, and fought on the side of your government. Now I want to go home to rest. So grant me this last request, Mr. Governor. Send me back to Futa, a revolutionary soldier. Revolutionary soldier, Richard Pierpoint. Revolutionary soldier, revolutionary soldier. Revolutionary soldier said he was stolen from Africa and he was brought to America. Said he was stolen from Africa and he was brought to Upper Canada. Revolutionary soldier, revolutionary soldier, revolutionary soldier, revolution. Thank you. I am going to read now a poem called Fugitive, and it's from my new book, was launched in October 2020, last year. It's called Black Matters, and it's a collaboration I did with Wilfrid from the University of Bielefeld in Germany. Willie's a photographer and also a literary scholar. So his images and my poetry form this book. And A Fugitive. And this poem was inspired by a slave advertisement in a newspaper called the York Gazette, York meaning Toronto at the time, in 1806. And the ad was put there by Peggy's slave owner, a man named Peter Russell, who was a member of the colonial elite in fact, at one point, from 1796, after Simcoe left the province, Peter Russell was administrator of the province, so really high up, and he owned this family of enslaved people, Peggy, her children. There, more information I got about Peggy, other than the ad, is from the diary of Elizabeth Russell. Elizabeth Russell was Peter Russell's sister. And they're Anglo-Irish. They came from Ireland to Upper Canada. And Elizabeth Russell didn't like Peggy. In fact, she hated Peggy. And we know this because she kept the diary and she wrote about Peggy and Peggy's children. And it's important to know that enslaved women didn't own their children. I talked about Anne Maria Jackson before, whose husband went mad when they sold the children, 2 of the children, because the husband was a free man. But in the eyes of Delaware law, once a woman was a slave, the children inherited the woman's status. So Peggy's children belonged to her enslaver, in this case, Peter Russell, and also Elizabeth Russell. And Peggy was in the habit of running away. She kept fleeing from the Russell household. And those of you who know Toronto, the Russell house was at the corner of Princess Street and Front Street, where the Toronto Sun has its building. Right now, that's where Peter Russell's household was. The lake came further up. The lake came right up to Front Street. And that was a household in which Peggy was enslaved. So the voice I'm speaking in is the voice of Elizabeth Russell, the female enslaver. Elizabeth Russell speaks of her slave, Peggy Pompadour. Peggy is in the habit of running away. It would be bad enough if she left by herself. But now she's taking her children with her. She is a very bad woman, a mean slave. She goes to the outskirts of the city and roams the bushes, eating berries and wading in the Don River, catching salmon that still travel to these parts. She has erected a hut of sorts from the brambles of the elderberry tree. She lived there with her daughters, Amy and Millie, for 3 weeks until Peter sent the constables to retrieve her. He returned the children to the house, but kept Peggy in jail. Now he wants to sell her, but neither Joseph Brant nor Matthew Elliott wants to buy her on account of her fugitive career, though they had promised Peter they would. Because no one wants her, Peter has to keep her in jail. He resents paying the jailer's fee. If only this mean slave would behave. Her so-called husband, Pumpy, visits her each day, bringing her food, a blanket, and ginger tea. He tells me that even though it is summer, it is still cold in jail. Once Pumpy even snatched the children from the house to visit her. Pumpy is a free man. Otherwise, we would jail him too. Peggy's incorrigible son, Jupiter, has followed in her fugitive steps. He has just run off. Someone saw him in the vicinity of the Don, around Potcher Road, lurking about Mr. Long's farm. Peter has sent the constables after him. Peter wishes to be rid of Peggy. I, for one, do not want her ever in this house. I hate the very sight of her after she smashed the fine china I crossed the sea with from Ireland. Because the jailer's fee is mounting, Peter is forced to put an ad in the newspaper. Matthew Elliott has disappointed us. Joseph Brant, the same. Perhaps someone else will take pity on Peter and take the wretch and her son off his hands. I have already taken away her 2 daughters, Amy and Millie, and given them to my goddaughter, Elizabeth Denison. And the ad reads, I'll read the first part of the ad for you. To be sold, a Black woman named Peggy, aged about 40 years, and a Black boy, her son, named Jupiter, aged about 15 years, both of them the property of the subscriber. I'll change the tone a bit and read a poem called Cimarron. Cimarron is Spanish for maroon, and a maroon is simply, well, not simply, a maroon is a runaway slave, someone who escaped from slavery, could stay away for a few weeks or a few days in the bushes, or join other folks and set up free communities in isolated places like mountains and swamps and so on. And so we have numerous maroon communities all across the Americas. But this poem doesn't take place in the Americas. It takes place in Spain, which I think is also an apt location. And in Spain, a few years ago, I was there before COVID and had an experience. I was in Granada, and Granada is so connected to the history of the Americas and also to the history of slavery. Columbus was in Granada on January 1st, 1492, when the Sultan of Granada handed over the keys to the city to the warrior queen Isabella and her husband Ferdinand, because the Christian armies had defeated the Muslims. Granada was the last stronghold of the Muslims on the Iberian Peninsula, and Columbus was there. So I was in Granada and just kind of soaking up the vibes, soaking up its African heritage, soaking up its Islamic heritage, which in so many ways the people of Spain have disavowed, both the African and Islamic heritage. I sit at the edge of the Alhambra. Below me, the world is as flat as a map. The plains go on forever. At their edges, I see the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, and over those mountains are Sevilla and Cordoba, oh, Andalusia. The sun is setting over Granada. The world is still for a brief moment, held in the embrace of orange translucence. The great fireball, pulled by Arabian steeds, hurries toward the west. The voice of the gypsy echoes all over Albayzan and Sacromonte, and in his voice I hear Boabdil's last sigh. To my right, from the mosque, the muezzin sings the adhan, proclaiming Maghrib, the sunset prayer. And behind me is San Nicolas Cathedral. It used to be the Grand Mosque before the Conquista. And this cathedral will soon ring its bells, announcing Vespers. Night comes suddenly, and the neighborhood awakens. Flamenco dancers, men and women, arrive. They dance, their heels clicking on the cobblestone, enlivened by the gitano singers. Tourists crowd around, clapping and cheering. I join in, imitating the movement of the dancers. A youth comes to me and shows me the bracelets he's selling. I made them myself, he said, 3 for 10 euros. He looks at me intently. You look like my sister. I am from Mexico, he said. Veracruz. I am black like you. Do you know of Yanga? Have you ever heard of Yanga? I am black like him. I am a Cimarron like him. And I'll end with this poem. It's called Negro Cemeteries, and I go back to Copper Woman and other poems. And this poem was inspired by a film called, what's the film called? The film is called Sankofa, by Haile Gerima. And Sankofa is an Akan word from, West Africa, Ghana. And it means go back and fetch it. And I think that's what I do in my life, in my scholarship, in my art, is going back and fetching these stories, bringing them to life, excavating them, bringing them to life, and sharing them. So in the scene, there's a scene in the film called Sankofa, in which a slave woman runs away from slavery. She's highly pregnant. She's caught. Her punishment is 100 lashes. While the punishment is being administered, she dies. There's another woman on the plantation who says, she's dead, but we have to save the baby. So I wove this poem, The Child is Alive. And I linked the midwife woman with Queen Nanny of the Jamaican Maroons, or two Queen Nanny, and a niece of Granny Nanny, an Akan woman, a woman who can see far, a woman with the knowledge of herbs, a woman who works in the field cutting cane, a woman who speaks the language of her grandmothers, a woman who tells stories of magical animals and of talking trees and of fabled cities beneath mighty rivers, a woman who was stolen from her village when she was 14, a woman who was raped on the slave ship by sailors, a woman who flies to Africa when she sleeps. This woman, this niece of Granny Nanny, takes her cutlass and runs with the swiftness of Sogolon Kande in her guise as Buffalo Woman. This woman runs with her machete, an ancient chant rising from her throat, an ancient chant imploring God and all the spirits that attend women in childbirth to come to her aid. Form a circle around this dead woman. Breathe, give her breath, give her life, help her to birth this child. This woman, this niece of Granny Nani, enters the circle with her cutlass, the ancient chant leaping from her lips, cuts open the belly of the dead woman and releases the child. And she says, "Oh, praises to God, the child is alive. Oh, Onyame, take the spirit of the mother. In the midst of our misery and pain, in the midst of our humiliation and grief, in the midst of this inhumanity, woo, our world is turned upside down. Day becomes night and night becomes day, and the dead is giving birth to the living." This woman, this niece of Granny Nanny, this ancient midwife, dances with the child, backward, forward, sideward, spins and joins her companions, dancing like the priestess she would have been had not slavery stolen her away from her people. She holds the child up to the skies, blessings. Oh, praises to God. The child is alive. Oh, Onyame, take the spirit of the mother. Praise to our ancestors. The child lives. Oh, Onyame, take the spirit of the mother. Oh, praises, 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 because a child is alive. Woy, woy, woy. The child is alive. Thank you, dear audience. And everyone, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Tara, for this.
And thank you so much, Dr. Cooper. I think that that was such a stunning tether to the past, as you were saying, and I got goosebumps. I could listen to you speak all day. So now we're going to move into the question and answer period. If folks wanted to share any questions they have, and then I have some that I've received through email and also some that were prepared. So yes, okay. Are we okay to move into questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay, great. So
let me just get my water.
Yeah, first take a minute, get some water, yeah. Incredible.
Okay.
Yes, and I know we all, Tara just made this comment, and I seconded that we wish we could have shared in the physical space with you and been in the room, and so you could have seen the affect and our experience of that, because it was so profound for us. So thank you, thank you for sharing to us and into sort of the void of what is the Zoom life.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the first question is. Comes from one of our audience members, and you spoke briefly about how meaningful the story of Marie Joseph Angelique has been in your labor and in your life. And the question is, what first drew your attention to the story, and why did you decide to pursue it and write a book about it?
Thanks for the question. What drew my attention to the story was an exhibit I saw ages ago at the Market Lane Gallery, which is in Toronto. And it was put on by the Ontario Black History Society. And they had this little snippet. Of course, Angelique was in Ontario, but they kind of expanded their perspective. And they had this like 1 or 2 lines about Marie Joseph Angelique. I was so fascinated because I didn't know slavery happened in Canada at the time. I, like most people, just thought of the Underground Railroad. And it just stayed with me. I mean, also because of the way she died, the horror of her death, and the, just her resistance. She ran away on a number of occasions. She challenged her owner, Madame Francheville, and I just found it so moving, the story, and I just kept at it. And finally, wrote the book. And the book is really based on her trial transcripts from both the upper court and the lower court.
Yeah, that leads us really well into the next question. So students in the first year history class, History Detective, are currently reading your book. Can you describe what it was like to conduct the research for the book, and how challenging, or maybe not challenging, it was to draw conclusions based on sort of the surviving evidence from the colonial archives?
Thank you. Are you hearing the rain?
Yes.
It's raining. Yeah. I like it. I hope it's not too disturbing.
No, I like it too.
Yeah, so the archives are there. Written by white men of a particular class, colonial elite. They're the scribe of the court. One of the things, the process, it's called the process, which it was a process. And so in the court, you had a scribe or several scribes. There's an office of the scribe, and the scribe and his assistant writes down what the judge is saying, what the accused is saying. So those are the documents. And I call it, I said, these are the first slave narratives in the New World, because the scribe also records her voice. This is what she says. So her very first kind of statement about herself tells us that she's from Portugal. And so there are those records, and there are the records of the government, the intendant of the province, the man who is, the intendant is like the prime minister. And he creates this huge dossier that he sends off to France, the mother country. Because you have to tell your superiors the city has burnt down. And he said, on the account of the wickedness of a negress. So those are the main documents. And in terms of my interpretation, I brought in my knowledge of transatlantic slavery and transatlantic slave trade, slavery in New France, slavery in Canada, to this. And not just sometimes read between the lines, but also, there's Angelique, and she's saying, sometimes it's not just a scribe that's kind of mediating or translating her words. She's saying directly, I hated my mistress. I told her not to sell me. When I found out she sold me, I was gonna take revenge. She's saying that. She didn't say how she was gonna take revenge, but she said. And then at one point she said, but I really didn't mean it. I told her I was going to take revenge, but I really didn't mean it. And many of us who say, well, did Angelique really set the fire? There were 23 witnesses who were brought to testify against her, and perhaps she didn't. And I'm saying, well, perhaps she did, because what did she have to lose in burning down the city? She was a property. She was a bonded woman who was brought to a settler society to have her labor used by white people in the building up of that settler society. She wasn't being paid. She wasn't gonna get EI if she lost a job. She was enslaved. She was property. She didn't own her children. What did she have to lose? And when you contextualize her story in all the vast story frame of enslaved people in the New World who burnt down the property of their owners, who poisoned their owners, who killed the cattle, or what have you, who ran away and established maroon communities. Why would she not? Nonetheless, it is probable that she didn't do it. But at the same time, for me, she stands as a symbol of resistance for the Black community in Canada and around the world.
Thank you. Your poem, Fugitive, Elizabeth Russell speaks of her enslaved persons, Peggy Pomadour, is an incredibly powerful piece depicting a female slave owner's rage, racism, and entitlement, while also showcasing, like you were just speaking to, the agency of enslaved and free Black Canadians. Can you discuss your process or goals while composing this poem?
Thank you. Yeah, well, it was the slave ad. That slave ad is becoming quite popular now. I've used it in the work I did with some other scholars. In the book, We're Rooted Here and They Can't Pull Us Up. It says in African Canadian women's history. We use that ad in discussing women's history in Ontario. So that was what started it. And then, Elizabeth Russell, she kept a diary. And in the diary, it's about York. It's about Toronto, because Toronto is, then Toronto is where, Toronto ended. The northern boundary of the city was Queen Street West, if you can believe that. So it was from Queen Street West down to the lake. Maybe from Jarvis in the east to Bathurst in the west. That was Toronto, if it was that large, but that general vicinity. And so she kept a diary, and she talks about the people in members of her class. She talks about their servants. She talks about the slaves, and of course she talks about her own slave. And it was she was very mean-spirited, as are most enslavers. But it was, for me, as a historian, as a poet, the material was great. I could use it to make poems, and that's what I did. And I thought of Peggy, this woman. I keep her in my heart. She keeps running away from Peter Russell, from the Russell household. And at times she would take her kids. And perhaps Peggy's thinking, well, where can I go? Can't go anywhere except to the bushes around town in the Don Valley area. That's where she would go and hide out for weeks sometimes. And then they'd find her and take her back. And Elizabeth didn't want her back in the house, so Peter puts her in jail. And here's this mother, this Black mother, and this is how the kind of reproductive violence that Black women and Black men endured during the period of enslavement. So here she is in jail, and her children are taken back to the house, and she married a free man by the name of Pompey, and he's there visiting her in jail and taking the children. And it's such a sad story, but Peggy would not give up. And Peter also tried to sell her to Joseph Brandt, of the Grand River, the Six Nations leader, Joseph Brand, Matthew Elliott, who was in Windsor, Ontario. And they are both men are members of the colonial elite, but they didn't want Peggy because they said she's a fugitive, she's gone away. They wanted a docile slave. And so, and you know, and then Elizabeth Russell, in this moment of glee and vengeance, she said, well, you know, I have given her 2 daughters to my goddaughter. So, you know, Black women and Black children were chattel. They could be given away, they could be traded, they could be sold. That's how that poem came. So, you know, when I walk in downtown Toronto, I think of Peggy. Walk on Queen Street West, this would be her stomping ground. Jupiter was hiding out in the around the Don River area and the Patra Road. Jupiter was hiding out there, this 15-year-old boy. And, you know, his owner sent the constables to retrieve him. Makes me think of also what's happening to Black boys today in Canada and in Ontario, the constables retrieving them and having them under surveillance and abusing them.
Thank you for that. So keeping on the theme of responding to these histories of violence today, you chaired the scholarly panel on Lord Dalhousie's relationship to race and slavery that investigated your university's namesake and his connection to slavery. What were your panel's findings, and how would you advise other universities whose names or lands are closely tied to histories of slavery or colonialism in addressing these relationships?
Thank you. Our panel found a number of things. The report is online. It's called Lord Dalhousie's History on Race and Slavery. It's online at Dalhousie's website, so people can read it there. I think it's 135 pages, and all the recommendations are there. But we find 5 or 6 main entanglements that the university and the man himself, George Ramsay, Lord Dalhousie, had with slavery, race, anti-Blackness in the colony of Nova Scotia. It was a British colony. And I'll just speak to 2, and that is Lord Dalhousie's relationship to the Black refugees of the War of 1812. And these were people, families that had supported the British cause during the War of 1812. So the British had this strategy. In the American Revolutionary War, they called on enslaved African Americans to join them. Help us fight this war. When this war is over, we'll make you free, or we'll give you your freedom, we'll send you to our colonies. Okay, that happened. You had the Black loyalists. Then 30 years later, the War of 1812, same thing. And these enslaved African Americans ran away from their masters, waded through swamps, swam, you know, on oceans in oceans and rivers, and came onto British ships. The British didn't liberate them, come to the plantation and liberated them. They were self-emancipated. And these were children, these were women, these were men, and they performed a variety of tasks for the British, including serving in the military and in the Navy. So when at least 3,000 of them came up to Nova Scotia and then New Brunswick, at the time Lord Dalhousie arrived in 1816 and wanted to deport them from the province because he conceptualized Nova Scotia as a white man's country, clear as day. I want this space to be for white people. We don't want these Black people, even though these people had supported the British Crown and the British Crown had promised them support and so forth. Lord Dalhousie wanted to deport them. And so that's one of the first findings. And when he wasn't successful in deporting them to, one scheme he had in mind was to send them back to their former slave owners, if you can imagine that. So he wasn't successful, but he enacted policies that served to marginalize the Black refugees and the communities that they built. He cut their rations. The war had ended. I call it in the Richard Pierpont poem, The War of Napoleon. It was the end of the Napoleonic Wars. The war had ended, all the veterans were in need, whether they were white or black. Lord Dalhousie cut the rations of the black refugee, reduced them to starvation. When he visited them in the places where they were living, he said, I have to give them rations because without it, they will perish. He knew they were starving. He cut the blankets, the allotment of blankets and seeds and so forth. So the guy was just a vicious racist. And he was a man who founded an institution named after him, to which Black Nova Scotians and Black people in general didn't have access to and couldn't even enter the gates. The second relationship, which is just as crucial, is that the Dalhousie's endowment, the original endowment, the monies that established a school came from the West India trade. Now, it came from a fund called the Castine Fund. And basically, the Castine Fund was monies that the British and Canadians from Halifax stole from Castine, Maine. So during the war, they went to Castine, Maine. It's American. They captured the port of Castine and they seized the money. What came up to about 12,000 Halifax pounds. And they took the money back to Halifax. At the time, Lord Dalhousie arrived as governor, so he got in control of the money. And it was from that money that they used that money to endow this new college that they were building in the province called Dalhousie College. Now, I mentioned that the money came from the West India trade. West India trade is this trade between Eastern Canada and the West Indies, where the slaves in the colonies, the West Indian colonies, grew the sugar, made molasses, rum, grew plantation staples like coffee and cocoa and so on, and exported that, or the slave owners, to Eastern Canada in exchange for salted fish, salted beef, salted pork. That became the main protein source for the enslaved people in the Caribbean. So this West India trade was what the Castine Fund came out of, right? So that is the smoking gun. Dalhousie University was established with slavery money. You know, from the toil really established on the backs of enslaved people in the West Indies. And they wouldn't have access to the university. They couldn't go there. So, and even further monies were given to Dalhousie University from the provincial legislature. It was called Dalhousie College then, from the provincial legislature and Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotian government. The economy rested on the West India trade. Most of the money, or a good portion of the money that the legislature had control of, were taxes that came from the tolls that ships had to pay once they left the West Indies and came into Halifax. And what was on those ships? Tropical items, sugar, rum, molasses, so on and so forth, grown by slaves. So those are the two main findings. There are others, but I'll just speak to those. What can other people do? What can other schools do? People need to establish, examine their relationship to race, slavery, and anti-Blackness, because for us at Dalhousie, we saw the evolution, the development, and the continuation of anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness was woven within every sector in society, whether it was education, economy, politics. This disenfranchisement, this marginalization had been occurring over the course of several centuries and still impact the communities right down to this moment.
Well, thank you for those incredible insights. And I'm sure that we'll all go and read the report for those of us who have not, as an important piece of work. Speaking about bringing these histories forward and remembering in your work, throughout your career, you've published writing in different forms, prose, poetry, academic reports. Can you describe more about your process or inspiration when you decide which form your writing will take?
Yeah, sometimes it's hard because, you know, if I set out, okay, so let's go back to Angelique. So I set out to write a book. I was gonna write a book, and I thought I was gonna write a novel. And then I thought, no, I'm gonna do nonfiction because I felt that there were some things I couldn't fictionalize. I felt it would kind of do violence to the sources and to the work. And I didn't want to make it a work of fiction because it was real, something that real happened. And this woman, she was hanged and her body burned. I mean, you can still do that in fiction. But like I said, I started out with that idea. And then as I did the research and got the documents, it kind of came that way, that it would be a work of history, that it would be a scholarly work. With the, you know, and I have pedagogy in mind too, a commitment to pedagogy. So when I thought of children, and I was grappling with the question of children in slavery, and I thought, well, I'm gonna look at two enslaved children who were successful and who learned to read and write, and just look at their lives and who contributed to literature, to world literature. And that's when I wrote, my name is Henry Babe, A Story of Slavery and Freedom. My name is Phyllis Wheatley, A Story of Slavery and Freedom. I'm still kind of stuck to the backbone of the story, but fictionalized their experience, the two. And then, you know, poetry is always there. It's always, it's a refuge, I would say, because sometimes when I just can't find a way in to the work, let's say it's a scholarly piece of work, which is also creative, because you want to write in a way, you want to write prose that's elegant. You want to write prose that touches people, but then the the poetry is another, gives one, or gives me another dimension to access. It's another layer, and for me it's kind of peeling back layers when I engage in this creative work. And sometimes if I'm writing something like nonfiction or prose or scholarly, I really can't write poetry, or it will take me a long time. But what I do is to read poetry. So when I was writing my dissertation, for example, I don't think I wrote a poem during that time, but poetry was my companion. I read just a lot of poetry. So it really comforted me. Because, you know, the subjects, the topics that I deal with, they're hard. Most of the time, they're hard. And I look for the beauty. And, you know, so the last poem I read, "The Child is Alive," I ended by saying the child is alive. I ended on this note of hope. And as some people say nowadays, radical hope. The child is alive. What does that mean? The child didn't die with the mother. The child is alive. It opens up a world of possibility. It's like a flower opening up. And so that's what I want to leave audiences with. That possibility, also the possibility for our own lives.
Incredible. Thank you. When creating these materials that are seeking to touch people and to bring forward these emotions or this affect, you're often working in collaboration with people. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what it was like collaborating with Wilfrid Rossert, I hope I said that right, on
Yeah.
Black Matters to make the book of poetry and photography.
We well, I've gone to Germany twice in 2017 and 2018 to do readings, to do poetry readings, and also to do a seminar with master's student, Willie's student, who studied North American literature, but they weren't studying Canadian literature, they were studying American literature. And I kept saying, they need to study Canadian literature. So anyway, I was invited to do a seminar on Black Canadian literature, which was wonderful, and I did that. And in 2018, that's how the idea for the collaboration came about. We just walked. Bielefeld is a small town in northern Germany, around Hanover. You know, everybody knows Hanover, the big city. Bielefeld is a little university town close by. And there are all these murals that depict some aspect of Black life. Nina Simone, I took a picture, me and my daughter, beside Nina Simone's mural. Really, and we took photographs with Black students or citizens of the town. Not all of them were students. People who came from, diverse points of the African diaspora, Cameroons, Colombia, France, you name it. And that's just how the collaboration, it was really an organic process. And 2 years later, we had a book, the book materialized. And so, of course, we're talking about Black Lives Matter, but it's also a riff on that, because Black matters, the matter as in the material, the matter, and also Black as significant, Black people as we acknowledging Black people. That's how that came about. I also collaborate. I like collaborating. I love collaborations. I think I'm happiest as a writer when I collaborate, because it's so great, especially when you can trust your collaborators. And I found people that I can trust. I write with 2 other women, Dr. Caroline Smarts-Frost, and she's an archaeologist and historian, and Adrian Shad, who is a historian. And we've done some great collaborations. We're actually writing a book together, the 3 of us right now. But we have done exhibits together, and it's just so much fun because each person has her own area of expertise, and then you bring them together. So
okay, so I'll just offer one final question, and that is, if there's anything that you would like to share that you would like us to take into the remainder of the month or the year or this time, what would you like to share with us?
I think I want all of us to have this commitment to equity and to equality. Oftentimes we say equity, and I always think, well, why can't we have equality? But a commitment to it, to equity and to equality, and to support the Black struggle. We're not going to go anywhere on this planet if each one of us isn't given justice, whether racial justice or social justice. For the longest while, people would say, and still to this day, well, get over it. Slavery happened a long time ago. Just work hard, pull your bootstrap or tie your shoelaces, or however the saying goes. And there's this lack of empathy and sympathy for Black people. I mean, it's when I look at across Canada, how the Black body is treated, especially by the cops. I know we have this mass incarceration of Black people into the prisons, provincial prisons. It's heartbreaking. There's a 75% increase of Black bodies in federal prisons from 2001 to present time. and we act as if nothing's happened. We kind of just continue through life, and you know, it's all beautiful. No, it's not. There are tragedies unfolding. Entire generations of people are you know, losing their life, their livelihood, their creativity, entire families. And I that's why I say Black matters, Black lives matter. And we talk about allyship and allies. We all have to be ready to man the barricade. It's there's a saying, I think Audre Lorde, in one of her lectures, she talks about it. It's all of us or none. And if white people think that they're gonna continue living high off the hog, sorry, some people don't eat pork, and then the rest of the people, you know, are just gonna be trampled down, no, it's not gonna happen. We have to create a new world, all of us. And I'm committed to that, and I want people to be committed to that, because this is our planet. We also have to care for the planet. Global warming is a reality. You know, Elon Musk wants to send people to the moon or to Mars, but most people won't be able to go. This is it, planet Earth. And wherever we are, in Canada, in Argentina, in Nigeria, in Egypt, we have to be stewards of the earth, as the indigenous people have taken up that stewardship, have been stewards for the past 1,000 years. So there's so many intersecting things, and we really can't compartmentalize things anymore. It's all of us or none.
Thank you so much. I know I deeply feel that severity and the urgency of this moment and the need for transformation. So I would like to thank you for your time. One of our colleagues, Terry Roswell, wrote in, and I'd like to share his sentiment and second
Sure.
that. We are so grateful for your knowledge, energy, passion, and brilliant style of performing. Your work is so appreciated and valued, and we are blessed to have you here at Wilfrid Laurier University. So,
oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you, Terry. Thank you for your kind words.
Yes. So thank you again for sharing this time with us. I know that I'm walking away with so much, and I hope that folks will continue to engage over the next couple of weeks, and obviously forevermore. I'd also like to thank Tara, the History Department, and the People Make History lecture series for this incredible learning opportunity. And thanks to everyone who attended today. We hope that you enjoy the remainder of Black History Month, again, as one stop on a lifelong learning journey of remembering, learning, celebrating, and seeking justice in honor of Black lives. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and folks can head out. Thank you again.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Tara, and to the audience. Have a good day, good week. Bye-bye.